Welcome to this week's Riks Round Up. My name is Rebecca, and in the panel today is Elias Norgren and Peter Kleppe, both editors of Riks Europe, amongst other things. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca.
So today we talk about the newly presented EU Commission, EC throws cold water over Dutch migration opt-out request, and Israel hits Hezbollah. But we'll start off with our first topic. From Queen to Empress inside Ursula von der Leyen's power grab, a headline from Politico, by the way. I'll start off by asking you, Peter, how has Ursula von der Leyen's restructuring of the European Commission impacted the balance of power within the EU?
Well, this was a big week in Brussels. It started with the resignation of the French European Commissioner, Thierry Breton. You remember he was the one telling Elon Musk that he should not violate EU disinformation regulations when he was going to interview Donald Trump. And he had to backtrack after that, people in Europe suddenly realized that it's not such a good idea for European commissioners to intervene in the American presidential election. So let's say suddenly the adults entered the room and told the children to stop playing. Now Breton resigned. This was because von der Leyen conspired with French President Macron to replace Breton with somebody else, Stéphane Séjourne, who's actually somebody that is very close to Macron. So Macron has a lot of influence now on the French commissioner. And then the next day, Ursula presented her new commission. And in a nutshell, as you said, as Politico also wrote, this is all about strengthening the power of Queen Ursula. She has put a number of trusted people, Mr. Dombrovskis, Mr. Šefčovič, at high positions. She has also positioned 3 commissioners that are in favor of continuing with the Green Deal and the extreme climate policies at important positions. The Spanish commissioner, who's very left-wing, who's also an opponent of nuclear power, and then the Danish commissioner, Mr. Jorgensen, who's also against nuclear power. So it's quite crazy. All across Europe, you see governments saying, "Look, nuclear power is a good idea. It's able to maintain low energy prices and at the same time avoid CO2 emission." But von der Leyen is simply going against that by appointing people that are hostile to nuclear power. So we can only hope that the European Parliament and maybe the member states will intervene.
I think it's pretty interesting how all of this could be viewed as a sort of, it's a division and conquering strategy, as Politico put it. And it's very interesting how this cements many of the very strong centralist tendencies in the European Union, all under Ursula von der Leyen. And I think it's a bit of a response to the criticism that the EU has received, and also like the backlashes the EU has received in not the least in the latest European election. I think this sort of galvanized the more pro-EU powers, the more pro-centralist powers in the EU to form this to get behind this type of constellation that the current commission is, that where you have a more or less an not absolute monarch, but that's almost what she's trying to emulate here. And I think it is a response to the issue of what the EU is supposed to be has come to a head, where all of these nationalists are now clashing with the federalists. And well, the Commission obviously can't take a centrist, neutral post on this. They have to resort to being this very pro-centralist force. I think that's what this is a reflection of. Now, the question is, does this actually change anything in the EU as far as what sort of policies we can expect? And I don't really think so, because all of this power, the commissioners have never had any type of power that represents the countries they come from. These are all civil servants, essentially. They're all subservient to the European Commission. They're always serving the European Commission. So this doesn't actually change the balance of power in the EU between the Commission and the member states per se. But it is an interesting development, nonetheless, on the personal political level of things, where Ursula von der Leyen has ousted her enemies, she's brought in loyalists, and whatever this might mean for the future.
Peter, do you agree that there wouldn't really be any big implications of these changes?
Well, we'll have to see, but it's always gradual. It's step by step, and let's not forget that the European Commission is a very powerful body. It has the monopoly to propose EU legislation, and EU legislation is good for sort of 2/3 of the impact of all legislation in Europe. So this is a very powerful institution. Often the European commissioners that are nominated by the member states, they have limited influence, because the people who really know the files and really understand the regulatory system are the people that are there to stay, the top bureaucrats of the European Commission, and you can often see that they really have a massive influence behind the scenes. Of course, to be fair, the ultimate culprits for the system are not the bureaucrats, but are the national leaders. They could put an end to this. They could change the system. They could say, for example, look, let's restore veto rights for European countries, so it becomes much more difficult to come up with this overregulation of the European economy that is killing our growth, that is killing our digital sector. But they don't do that. So far, national leaders still allow this to happen. They have even reappointed Ursula von der Leyen, and Ursula von der Leyen is now trying to undertake this very big power grab, and they continue to allow it to happen. So if you're looking for a culprit, they are still in the national capitals, I think.
I think this could also strengthen just the notion that the EU is turning into this monster that many people would have denied it was, because when power is centralized at Ursula von der Leyen, in effect, that puts a face that people can relate to what exactly is the EU. Well, it's Ursula von der Leyen. This will probably bolster EU critical sentiments in member nations, and also among governments, because they feel like their interests have been overturned by her decisions in forming this commission. Although it should be said, I think it's fairly interesting that the Commissioner for Internal Affairs and Migration is a person from Austria, which is, of course, a country that has tried to stand out with its criticism of immigration, and has joined in with the new German sort of line on how exactly Europe should be handling asylum seekers, for example. It's an interesting bone to throw to the immigration critical right wing.
And moving on, EC throws cold water over Dutch migration opt-out request. Peter, could you please tell us what specific concerns led up to this?
Well, there's a new government in the Netherlands composed of a number of right-wing parties. The Party for Freedom of Geert Wilders, the Farmers' Party, and then Christian Democrats, and a center-right Liberal Party. So they have said, look, we want to get an opt-out from EU migration policy, just like Denmark has. And right after the Netherlands officially demanded this to Brussels, also the Hungarian government, they followed, they said the same. Now the European Commission has responded. They have said, thank you for your request. We will take into account the next time when the European treaties are being negotiated. So everybody knows that to change a European treaty is very difficult. It doesn't often happen. And the reason Denmark has its opt-out is because back in, I think, 1993, they rejected the Maastricht Treaty, one of these treaties that expanded the powers of the European Union. The Danish people were against that, and then the Danish politicians negotiated a number of opt-outs in order to then submit it again to the Danish people, after which they approved. And now Denmark is very happy that they have more freedom to act to stop uncontrolled migration. For example, on topics like family reunification, that's a big problem. That when people get permanent residency in EU member states, then they can bring over family members, and European courts force countries to allow this, even if when this is often very bad for integration into societies and everything. The Netherlands is asking this, Hungary is asking this, but it's unlikely to happen because legally it's so difficult to get a change into the EU treaties.
I think it also shows just how almost unworkable the migration pact is as of now, because all of these nations that are probably wanting to, they want exemptions from the obligation to accept refugees, for example, migrants from all the border states of the EU, but they're not going to get it because it's just hidden behind a bunch of red tape. There's a bunch of treaty changes that would have to go through. It's just a very complicated process, and the EU is just not going to give these countries that pleasure. And it just makes me wonder if this is just a symbolic move by the Dutch government to show that they're trying to act on the will of the people with regards to immigration. Because, as you said, it's a right-wing government that was elected on criticism of immigration. They want fewer asylum seekers, for example. And it's just not going to happen. And that could probably... It pits the government against the EU in a way. I think they at the very least, all of the nationalistic elements of this government will probably appreciate that, to have to take this fight. I think it's also very interesting that in Sweden, for example, the migration pact has been sold as this sort of, it won't affect Sweden negatively because we've already accepted so many refugees in the past. It's fine. The EU is not going to pressure us. Well, the Netherlands is not all that different from Sweden. Obviously, they have the rest of Europe has an ongoing crisis with asylum seekers right now, but they're still not given this exemption. And this is sort of proves to the Swedish political class that no, you're not going to be giving the exemptions when you think you're going to get them. Because the Netherlands didn't. Obviously, Sweden is not going to deserve it in the eyes of the EU either. So this is a bit of a warning sign, I think, of what the Migration Pact actually is. You're not going to be able to opt out of it.
Yeah, and if I may add, you're absolutely right that ultimately this is mostly symbolic because it's very hard to implement it. And I find it a bit unfortunate that the Dutch government is not focusing on something that could actually happen, which is to get all the other governments behind outsourcing of asylum processing. First, you need a deal at the European Union level that they will, for example, negotiate with Rwanda or some other country outside of the EU. And that is legally already possible. It is true that maybe the European Convention of Human Rights, which is a different body, may be critical, unfairly, I would say. If you look at the convention, it should be possible in theory, but okay. But even then, they could use Albania as a partner, perhaps, which is what Italy is trying at the moment, because unlike Rwanda, Albania is a member of the Convention for Human Rights. So in a nutshell, there's a lot of things that are not possible, sadly, under the current framework of treaties. But actually many things are. And then I think it's a bit unfortunate that this new right-wing government and other governments in Europe are not doubling down on at least starting with what is possible today to stop the chaos. Because even, look, if you like migration or you hate migration or wherever you stand, I think nobody can defend what is happening today, that European laws and national laws are completely ignored. Everybody who wants can ultimately be smuggled in. They can stay. In practice, very few people are actually being sent back. I mean, nobody who supports the rule of law should support a system like that. Nobody who believes in orderly migration should support this, because this is pitting the European population against migration so even if a right-wing government enters power, you see them still looking for these symbolic measures that can, get them a good fight with the EU, which is good for the base, but will ultimately not solve the problem.
And moving on then to Israel versus Hezbollah, I'll open to you, Elias. What is the implications of this second wave of attacks in this conflict?
Well, I think it took many people by surprise that this actually even happened, that this took place in the first place. First you had the detonation of these sorry, I forgot the name of these electronic devices in the first wave that happened a couple of days ago, and then you have the second wave that also struck a different set of electronic devices, walkie-talkies, I believe, in the pagers. Yes, that's the word, pagers. Sorry. So it sells the. It's interesting how it just shows Israel as just exactly what it is capable of. It's become a sort of a PR moment almost, because you see a lot of people on social media are really celebrating this. And a lot of people who I think are nominally critical of what Israel is doing has somehow managed to strike Hezbollah with a relative level of finesse that you haven't really associated with Israel recently, with the bombings of Gaza and all of these killed children and all this terrorism that the country is being accused of committing. I think that this incredible almost strike at Hezbollah in a completely different fashion sets Israel in a very different light, and I think it's been very effective from a PR standpoint.
Yeah, I agree, Elias. This is mostly a PR victory, or the significance of it is mostly a PR victory for Israel. It really sends a signal that the Hezbollah has to be really careful what they're doing. There are some rumors that the reason why Iran has not yet responded to Israel taking out an important Iranian operator on Iranian territory is because of the same concern. Iran fears that Israeli intelligence is so powerful that if they strike back at Israel, that they are going to get some kind of a similar response. And of course, people say, look, Israel still did not respect international law and the international law of war because it, in theory, would need to be able that every pager is being held by a Hezbollah terrorist, which, of course, Israel was not able to. But then, indeed, if you compare with many other acts of war, this is actually very, targeted. It's certainly a lot more targeted than what Lebanon is doing, or what I should say, what Hezbollah is doing, because Hezbollah is effectively occupying Lebanon. They have been sending so many missiles to the north of Israel that the north of Israel is effectively uninhabitable. So then, wherever you stand, you should say, look, I mean, what should Israel do? Should they send a letter to Hezbollah to ask them to stop? I mean, they do have a right to defend themselves, and everybody knows that once Iran and Hezbollah stop attacking Israel, they will also no longer bother. Israel has been occupying a part of Lebanon. They have withdrawn 15 years ago or so. So they have no interest in, intervening into that country if it were to be peaceful, but it is not.
Thank you, Elias Norgren and Peter Kleppe.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Rebecca.
And thank you for watching Riks Europe.